First of all, it's great to be here at Brisbane State High School. I've been talking to the Year 11 and 12 students about their futures, about futures in the Australian Foreign Service, futures in working in the Australian International Aid Agency, and futures in working in the world in general. This is a great high school, and there are kids from across the world literally at this high school. I know it well. It's in the heart of my electorate here in Brisbane. It's been a great privilege to be able to spend some time with the kids this afternoon. And then in the great spirit of the democracy of Australia's senior and secondary schools, cop some interesting questions on the way through as well. So well done to the kids. I hope I did them some justice with the answers I provided. Today I am leaving Brisbane to travel to Indonesia for the meeting of East Asian Summit Foreign Ministers, 18 of them from around East Asia and the United States, and then the ASEAN Regional Forum meeting, which deals also with regional security questions. This will be an important meeting because we are building up to the East Asian Summit later this year, which will for the first time be attended by the United States with President Obama's attendance, and also Russia at head of government level as well. This region is of vital relevance to Australia's economic and strategic interests into the future. First and foremost, we have more than $300 billion worth of annual trade with the countries of this wider region. Therefore, we have a massive vested interest in this region's long-term security and stability. And that's why, secondly, this East Asia Summit is critical in beginning to develop a system of common security across the wider region. A system of rules and norms for security policy behaviour across the wider region, in a region which is still characterised by many unresolved territorial disputes, many unresolved political conflicts, many unresolved ideological disputes as well. Therefore, it's important that we use this institution, which in part at summit level derives from the work which the Australian government put into the concept of an Asian Pacific community, is given every opportunity to work. Australia will be actively contributing to the shaping of the agenda for the summit later this year, both in terms of how we deal with the challenges of maritime security across the wider region, as well as confidence and security building measures, such as how we have better integrated counter-disaster management systems across all of this region, given how prone we are to natural disasters. I think that's what the peoples of our region expect as well. Having attended those foreign ministerial meetings in Indonesia, I'll then travel to the Horn of Africa. I'll be travelling to Nairobi at the invitation of the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, and then travelling with the United Nations to border camps between Kenya and Somalia. We are on the cusp of an extraordinary humanitarian crisis in the world. This is the worst drought on the Horn of Africa for 60 years. There are some 10.8 million people who stand to be directly affected by it, 1.8 million of whom live within southern Somalia and are therefore in a region of the world which is also prone to massive insecurity because of the rolling activity of the terrorist organisation Al-Shabaab. Therefore, in my discussions with the head of the UNHCR, Guterres, the head of the World Food Programme, Sheeran, as well as last night with the head of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Valerie Amos, it is absolutely critical that the international community gets the message that we must act now to avoid an unspeakable humanitarian disaster. That is why the Australian government has decided to contribute a further $30 million to the efforts which are now underway, primarily by the World Food Programme, but also by the UNHCR in the Horn of Africa. This is necessary to feed people, it is necessary to clothe people, it is necessary to provide them with shelter, it is necessary to provide them with clean drinking water. We in Australia do not intend to stand idly by while this region is visited yet again by a large-scale humanitarian disaster as we've seen in previous decades. There is some good news in the sense that the World Food Programme, partly supported by Australia, has already pre-positioned large supplies of food and other medical equipment in the border regions surrounding Somalia to deal with such an eventuality. The challenge, however, lies most particularly with the 1.8 million people who are physically in Somalia, who it is very difficult to reach at present. We know from reports as they come out what a weakened state they are in. Australia also stands ready to provide further assistance as is necessary. This is approaching famine proportions, and the international community must act, and Australia will play its part. Once I return to Australia, I have some other things to attend to, which I'd also like to mention briefly to you this morning. When I get back to Australia, it's come for a time for a bit of a grease and oil change myself. I'll be having aortic valve replacement surgery at a hospital either in Sydney or in Brisbane. Those of you who know my medical condition well know that I had one of these done about 20 years ago. It's wearing out. The docs have said, Kev, it's time for a new one. And so, being the obedient soul that I am, I've decided to take their advice, and that's what's happening. Surgery will be on or about the 1st of August. The precise arrangements are being sorted out by cardiologists and by cardiac surgeons, and that'll be known in due course. On top of that, the normal recovery period is somewhere in the vicinity of about 8 weeks. That's what I went through last time, 20 years ago, when some of you may remember I was Director General of Cabinet Office here in Queensland, and I haven't aged any since then. Neither of you, Fraser. And then I'll be back at work and doing everything that I've done in the past. In case anyone raises the question, the doctors advised me that I have every expectation of a total recovery, as it happened last time. This is now a reasonably common procedure across the country. Stacks of people have it, and so it will not change one iota my intention to recontest this seat of privilege on behalf of the Australian Labor Party at the next election. And I intend to continue to make whatever contribution I can to Australian public life through the government following the next election. Two final points. I've been the beneficiary of organ donation in the past. What's in here at the moment belongs to somebody else who died and whose loved ones decided to donate this tissue. I'd like to thank them for that. I'd also like to make it very clear to people across the country how important it is to donate to life. The Donate Life campaign around the country is really important. We still have a couple of thousand people on organ transplant lists around Australia, and it's really important that people in the Australian community, when they face with family tragedy, think of gifting their loved ones organs to help save the lives of others. And one final point is I got this through rheumatic fever when I was a little kid a long time ago. Fortunately, I'm advised rheumatic fever has virtually been eliminated in Australia in white communities, but not in Indigenous communities. And again, I would say that it's important the nation redoubles its efforts to ensure that rheumatic fever is removed from the disease risks which young Indigenous children face across the world as well. And I'm happy to take questions.